Hey folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and as you may have guessed from the title, I made a zombie bear. Now why did I make a zombie bear? I don't know. Why not? Now the first step in making any good zombie bear is to make its bare bones first, and by bare I don't mean skinless and meatless, but the actual ursine bones that make up the structure of the body, which, I suppose in this context, are also bare since I haven't added the skin yet. That comes later, but for now I'm making my bare bones out of aluminium wire since this will eventually become a polar bear and he'll be standing in snow, so I need his bones to be rust proof. I found a photo of a grizzly bear skeleton on the internet that I printed to scale and I can use to now bend some wire into the appropriate shape for the various limbs, so once I've got a front and back pair of legs I can attach them to a spine with some teeny tiny armature wire and glue. It's also worth holding on to the reference photo until you're done, since it can be hard to understand how legs work and sometimes they get attached backwards. Hey, wait a minute. Fortunately, a little twisting of the hip bones and you can fix that problem and move on. I'll mount my bear on the wood blocks so that I can get the pose figured out. Now I know I want this zombear to be standing on 3 legs while swiping with a front paw, so I'll use an additional block of wood to lift him up so I can put a rock under him eventually. Once I've got the pose figured out, I can get started bulking up the body, which I'd normally do with lots of foil first to keep the amount of clay used to a minimum. However, I don't know how much battle damage this zombear is going to be rocking, so I'll only use a little bit of foil so that I can cut away as much clay as I need later. Otherwise, it's time to start heaping that clay on. As is so often the case when I'm building a big bulky body, I'm not going to be overly concerned by the anatomical accuracy of anything at this point, since I can always remove stuff later. The initial stage is just about getting clay on the figure in kinda the right places. I was a bit stumped trying to figure out what size I was going for, since I was torn between the sickly skinny zombie bear with thin skin draped over a malnourished body or the full fat big bellied ready for hibernation bear. In the end I figured that when it comes to human zombies, there always seems to be an assortment of body types across all the sizes, so why not go big and lovable? Eventually, I've got enough of a base built up that I can start to refine the shape, so once I've smoothed all the seams out, I can attach a nice long neck with a pointy face on top. Now, if you're looking at this wondering how I'm going to justify starting with a grizzly bear skeleton and ending up with a polar bear body, then I recommend you look up something called the growler bear. It turns out the true danger of climate change is the migration of polar bears south in search of food, where they're mating with grizzly bears and creating a super bear with the best of both worlds. So if anything, this is my most scientifically accurate model yet. At this point, I'll start to get started on the start of the face by separating the upper and lower jaw and hollowing out the mouth before building up the smaller details of his face. This isn't my first time building a bear, and the last time I found it hard to figure out the proper shape and proportion of its nose. To get around that this time, I'm just gonna not make the nose at all and leave his skull exposed, 'cause zombies, you know? I'm going to be adding the details and stages, starting with a larger picture before working my way down into finer and finer details, which means I'll be hopping all over the body as I'm shaping it. I'm not entirely sure how much detail I need to worry about on a surface level, since I'm planning to cover this bear in thick fur, so spending hours refining the muscle only to hide it in the fur feels like a bit of a waste of time. Once I've got my general body shape figured out, I can get started on the feet, or the paws, I guess, which are pretty bog standard 5-toed affairs. However, it's at this point that I'll start to zombify this otherwise normal looking bear. The first step in making gnarly open wounds is removing a decent amount of clay to surface level, then sharpening the edges so there's an obvious separation between the skin and the muscle layer beneath. Next, I'll need to add some bones, which means I'll need to make them. I know I'm going to need lots of bones and teeth and claws, so I figured I could just do it all at once and pick and choose what I want for each injury later. For instance, I always love an exposed rib cage, so I'll make a bunch of flatworms of clay, then bend them slightly until they're nicely rib cage curved. A bunch of little wormy dealies will be my various finger bones, and some slightly larger lumps will be, well, slightly larger bones. I'll then make a bunch of large hooked claws for each of the 20 toes. Once they've been baked in the oven to cure the clay, I can take my knife to them to roughen them up a bit and add a bit of surface damage, then I can start to stick them in place. With one paw perfected, I can get to work on the rest of the body, adding loads of big and small battle wounds to really gross this guy up. The left arm will be doing a big swipe, so I'll leave the paw mostly intact, but I'll cut away the skin on the arm to expose the terrifying bear muscle beneath. I wanted the arm to be somewhat anatomically accurate, So I googled muscly bear, and after a couple unexpected leather-related search results, I found some great reference photos of a bear's musculature, which I tried to recreate on the arm. I've got some of those big bones I made earlier waiting to get used, and I figured one of the back legs would be ideal for this, so I'll mark out a big section on the hind leg to remove the surface layer so that I can form a nice pocket to fit my exposed bone neatly into. Then some striation for the muscles on the sides and a good amount of trypophobia-inducing dot work to add a little extra detail. On the other side, I wanted to give my zombear a massive open wound exposing the vacant chest cavity, so I'll carve away a huge amount of the clay and then add plenty of the random gnarly texturing before jamming a bunch of vertebrae into the top. I'll then carve away a bit of the muscle to make way for my ribs, which I'll just kind of jam into place. Now they ended up being a bit smaller than I ended up needing, but rather than remake them, I'll just break away the tips and say they were always the correct size, they just broke off at some point. With the body mostly finished then, I can get back to the face and start refining the details there. I'll add his eyeballs to some pre-poked eyeball divots, then build up the area around the right eye while leaving the left eye uncovered, since I want that part of the skull to be fully exposed. To make his mouth, I'll lay down a little clay around his bottom lip, which is still very much intact, then jam some big teeth into his upper jaw and blend them in, since there won't be any skin to separate the skull from the teeth. It's tempting to give this bear a bunch of scary pointy teeth, but in reality a bear has molars similar to ours since they eat plenty of non-meat meals as well. I'll then do pretty much the same thing to the bottom jaw with the front row of canines and a back row of molars, then stick a tongue in place and add a little bit of extra tendon connecting the top and bottom jaw. Finally, a couple ears will hopefully make this bear look a little less silly. Now his face is still a little bit thin compared to the rest of his body, but my thinking is that once I add the fur, it'll bulk out the face a bit more and help bring a bit of uniformity to his shape. For a little added detail, I'll poke and fill some divots with little blobs of clay to give my zombear lots of little moldy pustules before finally attaching his little bear tail on the back end. And with that in place, that's my zombear finished and ready for a coat of primer. Now I know a polar bear's fur appears white, but their skin is actually black, so I'm going to paint his entire body black. Of course, there's no way that I'm going to be able to add fur thick enough to cover that black underneath, so I'm going to add the black via a thin wash in what will hopefully be a really dark gray instead. I'll then touch up all the gnarly, muscly bits with a red wash, not worrying too much about painting outside the lines since I'm going to be coming back with a lighter gray top coat which I'll sponge aggressively over the black body with the intention of toning down the black and creating a bit of shading and gradient. While the black skin is probably more accurate, I think I can get away with my undead zombie bear having a slightly lighter shade of skin due to the fact that it's dead and it's not real, and I wanted to, so I did. I'll then go over the bloody bits with a brown wash to significantly reduce the vibrancy and to make the battle damage look a little more worn. Then I can repaint all the teeth and bones with a white base coat so they don't blend in with the muscle and bloody whatever bits that surround them. While I'm waiting for the bone white to dry, I'll touch up each of the pustules with a pustule green, then go back to my bones and give them all a sepia wash to make them look a little less blindingly white. All the claws will get a very dark brown once over, and I can paint the paw pitch black before adding a red to white gradient on the exposed eyeball in the skull. Last but not least, I'll give the battle wounds a coat of gloss varnish to make them nice and gooey. And with that, my naked battle bear is finished, which means it's time to add a fluffy fur coat. This little guy is a static grass box, and I've used him a few times before to add static grass to a model to make fake fur. In fact, I've used this very grass here, which is sort of a gross off-white yellow color that I think would be a perfect fit for a well-worn undead growler bear. I'll give my bear a coating of thinned out PVA glue wherever I want the grass fur to stick, then I can turn on my box and hover the bear over the top. The box statically charges the grass and launches it into the air where it sticks to my bear, providing a not too thick but not too thin coat of static grass turned polar bear fur. The static grass sticks perpendicularly to the surface, so a gentle poking with my finger will flatten it down a smidge so it's not quite so pointy. Then I can use a brush and some blasts of air from my compressor to remove any of the non-glued fur to expose the red wounds underneath. All I need to do then is apply a couple coats of red around the edges of the wounds to help blend the seams in and make it all look a bit more natural. A little flick of red paint will add some spattering of strawberry jam, and my Growler Zombear is all but finished, which means all that's left to do is give him something to stand on. Originally, I'd planned on a cage with a chain around the bear's neck, but that made me think of those circus bears and I got bummed out. So instead, I'm going to go with a snowy polar base and a rock to stand on. The old tried and true. I know how tall my rock needs to be by comparing it to the block of wood the bear is standing on, so once I've cut it to size and given it a more rocky looking look, I'll bash it with an actual rock to give it some rocky texturing before gluing it to my base. To prime the rock and protect the foam, I'll give the entire base a coat of black paint and Mod Podge. I'll then follow this up with a base coat of gray, followed by a series of progressively lighter dry brushes to highlight the details on the rock. I also bashed the base up a bit with a rock as well because I planned on leaving that as exposed rock in the snow, but in the end I ended up covering it all up anyways. To make my snow, I'm going to mix some snow white hole filler with a bit of Mod Podge. The hole filler will be my snow base, and the Mod Podge will help the hole filler adhere to the painted foam and provide a bit more strength as it cures. I'll just apply this all willy-nilly over the gray base and onto the rock, and once I've got a nice even coverage, I can press my bear down into place. I'll push a bit of snow up onto the bear's feet, legs, and outstretched arm, then using a little pipette I can dribble a few drops of freshly squeezed strawberry jam into the snow, letting it spread out and stain the white. And with that, we're all done here and on to the Glamour Shots. As always, a huge thank you to the patronizers of Patreon, and a special hey how are ya to my newest patrons, Dan WC, Ladyface and Thunderbeard, Jeremy Port, Goofy Danny Garland, Handbug, Robley Welliver, Stephen Henry, Crazy Muggle Mum, Maggie Hood, Andrew Bass, Mashford and Blashford, Rebecca Spitzer, Oleander at Heart, Jack and Mimi, Eric Miller, Dexter Murfles, Adrian Skitchitano, Starry Night Dreams, Uzor Har, Shadow Step 02, and Maddie. You are the fluffy fur that keeps this animated corpse of a channel running. If you're upset about the lack of bear puns, then I'm sorry, but I barely gave it any thought. However, if you bear with me, I'll bring the full might of my puns to bear next time for you to bear witness to. Bear. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.